Hello, everyone. Welcome to Nuclei's podcast series, Digital DNA, where I speak with industry leaders to understand their perspective, go back and look at their formative years, to discuss their worldview and learn from their overall experience. I'm your host, Ankur Joshi. I'm the founder and CEO of Nuclei. Nuclei is a global fintech firm where we work with 20 plus banks across Asia, and we implement our fintech products with various banking platforms. Today, I'm delighted to host Mr. Nahim Bassa, who is the Senior Vice President at Bank AlJazira. He's the Group Head of Strategy, Digital Transformation, Marketing, and PR at the bank. He's a strategic business leader with a vast experience and a very diverse experience. And he has led multiple organizations and has helped them through digital transformation journeys. His leadership style, his innovative business strategies, and his love for books is what we are going to discuss today. Nahim, it is my absolute pleasure to welcome you to our podcast.
Ankur, it's a pleasure to be here today, right? And thank you so much for the warm welcome. I think in future I will ask you to do my introductions at business meetings, at conferences and events. But it's great to be here today to chat to you, just to talk to you about, some of my life principles and what I've applied in my career to date, but also to share some of these views with your listeners, right, who I'm sure are going through their own journeys, right, and trying to get great perspective on what it means to be successful in today's very dynamic and somewhat challenging world.
Absolutely awesome. So I'm very excited to have this conversation with you because, right before we started recording, we were discussing about where you grew up and how situation has changed, how the definition of success has changed, right? So before we get into your professional journey, right, let's pull back the years and go back to your formative years in South Africa. And if you can give us some, experiences which you had back then, which were very, very, which ended up forming guide rails for you, or which were very, defining from your personality perspective, and which still hold true and have helped you through the years.
Yeah, thanks, Ankur. That's a great place to start, right? But let me do justice, right, to my family, right? To your audience, as you mentioned, I'm Nahim Bassa, right? But I'm actually a proud father and of two little munchkins. They're 7 and 8, right? One girl, one boy, and a loving husband, right? But you'll have to ask my wife about that one. I find that I spend a lot of my time, right, at work, right, because I'm very passionate about the work I do and the change we have in financial services that can bring to society. But I think what is also important, right, is there is a whole world around you, right? It's not just work or life. It's not just people talk about work-life balance. In my view, there's no such thing, right? If you're going to be passionate and invest your time and efforts on something, make sure it's worthy, make sure it's something you're proud of, so that, in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, right, you can show your kids and say, hey, I helped build that, right? I contributed to that, because they know you're away for 8, 10, 12, 14 hours, right, doing the stuff. So you got to love it, right? And you got to enjoy it. And if you don't enjoy it and you don't like it, then what are you building it for, right? What is the legacy that you are creating? And it probably talks a lot about my journey, right? I grew up in South Africa in the 1980s, so I'm a child of the 80s. So any character reference, right? And I think, all movies and music videos out now, right, have a strong link to any kid born in the 80s, simply because we are in the target age group to maximize their revenue streams from. It's probably why Top Gun Maverick did so well at the box office, right? But growing up in South Africa in the 1980s was quite challenging, right? Quite difficult. We were still probably at the height of apartheid. For those of you who may be familiar, right? Apartheid was quite it was quite a psychological, emotional, physical, economic situation, right? We've got about 50, 60 years in South Africa, right, where racial segregation took place. So we would color bar people according to their skin tone. So blacks, Indians, or people of Indian descent, coloreds, whites, right, would get colored barred, right? So you'd be tagged based on your skin color. And, it was quite even more challenging for people who have a skin complexion that might be half and half, right? So they would sometimes be separated from their families. So the separate development, which what apartheid means, was quite debilitating for the country, right? And growing up in the 80s, you would be only limited to your community, your race group, right? On the flip side, right, it allowed various cultures to still thrive, religions to still be accepted. So for every negative aspect, there's always light, and that's what I think you look for the positive in. But what it taught me, right, going through the 80s and then in our transition to democracy in 1994, you would know from the history books, right, from the subcontinent, Mahatma Gandhi was a big influence, right, in South Africa, who drove the resistance, right, peaceful resistance, right, Satya Ganda, right, to change, the South African government at the time. Nelson Mandela got released in 1990, right, which created a catalyst for change, right? And I was still a young kid then. I was about 10 or 12, right, when Mandela got released. So I've basically lived through quite an interesting period in South Africa's history, right? And you learn a lot of things, right? You learn that you get perspective of other people's hardships. You get a better perspective of race relations. You get a better perspective of economic class battles that are happening. And you definitely understand a lot more the reason why you were born. I think most people struggle with that throughout their life, right? Why am I here? What am I here to do, right? And we tend to attach ourselves on climbing a corporate ladder or seeing success through an Instagram filter. And I think, when I think of my personal journey, right, it's not so much about, I've done this in banking, I've done this in consulting, I've helped these Fortune 500 companies, or I've built a new business with 20 million clients, or whatever the case may be. It's more about, I think about my childhood. I think a lot about how I grew up and what opportunities were missed, right? And what better impact I could have had, or my family could have had, right, on society.
If you can give us some examples from that time, because this was a very era-defining moment, and you're absolutely right that you were part of history, what was happening in South Africa during that time. If you can give us some more insight, some examples, because people who might be listening to this might not have that much. You have lived through it, right? I have read it in books. I've not lived through it. So even for me, it will be very, very interesting to understand.
This is where I was going to share with you my experience about my mum, right? So my mum was growing up in the 60s, obviously, a few decades before I was thought of, as I should say, with my dad. But I look at my mum, right? My mum went to what they would call a former House of Delegates school, right? So schools were classified according to your race group, and certain races had to stay together. But she was very successful, right? She ended up matriculating, I think people call it Form 6, Grade 12, Standard 12. I'm out of touch with the different curriculums these days, right? It's so confusing between the British curriculum, the American curriculum, international curriculums. But when she matriculated, right, like getting into university, right, she got like 8 distinctions, so eight category courses. So that really, propelled her to think about, okay, what did she want to become? And what she really wanted to become was a doctor at the time, right? Because she wanted to help people. But the 60s and 70s were an interesting place in South Africa, right? You're part of a small population, maybe 0.5% of the total population. You have the skin color that counts against you, right? Your options were very limited. There were no sponsorships, bursaries, international travel. South Africa was under heavy sanctions, right? So importing, exporting, getting out of the country was quite difficult, right? Especially if you were not a Caucasian, right? So my mom really wanted to study medicine, and she actually got 2 bursaries, right? One to study at a medical college in South Africa, and the other one was to study French in the Sorbonne in Paris, right? But unfortunately, right, my grandparents' situation was quite precarious. My grandfather used to work in a plastics factory, right? They used to manufacture plastics. But the world was also changing, right? Not just only in South Africa, right? Automation was kicking in, industrialization was kicking in. So his job got retrenched, right? He was a well-educated person, but he had to take up essentially a job as a paper boy, delivering paper. My grandmother was a stay-at-home mom at that time. So what that meant for my mom was that she couldn't leave, right? She had to find a job that would easily pay the bills, would help support the family, right? And I think of this through two lenses, the lens of my grandfather, right? And the humiliation, right? Of not having, there was no job reskilling, there were no online programs, right? For him to find another skill set. Also economically, he comes from this race group, he's not in a preferential candidate, so he gets a sidetrack. No social security net at all. So I always wonder, right? Imagine if they had some sort of savings, right? Some sort of insurance, right? How different their life would have been, right? And how different my mom's life would have been. My mom, on the second lens, right, managed to, she became a teacher. She had a great career in teaching, right? But there's always a hangover of what if, right? Made a huge impact on lots of school kids, right? I mean, some of them I meet regularly in my travels, right? And they tell me, "Oh, you Mrs. Bassa's son." Right? Good and bad. But I think about how different life would have been for them, right? To have that support, because the financial stress and worries that came across it was immeasurable. So now when I roll forward, right, and I think about my mom's situation, there wasn't even an educational savings policy at the time, right? Either available or accessible, right? So when people ask, like, why did you get into consulting? Why did you get into banking? Why did you get into these sort of industries that, well, how did you pick it? It's because I want to make a positive impact, right, on society. I wanted people to be able to have a life with less financial stress, right? Because you take away that financial stress, it unlocks a whole world of creativity to be able to do things that you didn't even think possible yourself, right? So for me, it's about, the world is still in a highly unequal place. South Africa is still highly unequal, right? It still has one of the highest inequality ratios in the world, racial categories as well as actual quantum of people, right, in the different bands. I think it's 0.67, which is the highest in the world, right? So the wealthy are very wealthy and the poor are very poor. So you come up with this context and you think like, okay, you have to contribute more. You have to make it easier for people to access these financial savings and investment solutions, right? So they can live better lives. Now you lay over the context of the economic situation and the political situation in South Africa, where you didn't have this mixing, where you only went to a school with your fellow peers, right, of skin tone, right? And then you go through this transition in '94 to an open society, and you get access to new things, right? You go to schools that were formerly off limits, right? I mean, I went to what they would call a Model C, or formerly white school, right? My primary school did not have a soccer field, a cricket field, right? I go to a school that has 6 rugby fields, a swimming pool, right? It was like, wow, a totally different world, right? I mean, for anybody in the world, it's like going from a backyard, right, to an Ivy League type of environment. And then you think like, okay, this is not about saying, this is not about the have and the have-nots, right? This is about closing that divide, right, and making the pie bigger for everyone. And so how do we do that, right? Which industry has the power to do that, right? In South Africa at the time, it was around mining and resources, right? But eventually the talent flocked to financial services, right? And in any country, right, financial services is the backbone of the economy, right? You see it at the dramatic situation that's happening in the UK, even globally with the recession. Banks have a pivotal role to play to change these things. So I always go back to my mom's situation, right? And what happened to her and the decisions and choices that were forced to be made. And I think, okay, imagine if we give people greater choices, greater freedoms, right? How much more impactful will they be and not just for their personal life, but to their families, their communities that they operate in. Because those people generally have a disproportionate positive impact. They set up schools, right? They become really, they set up infrastructure, they create businesses. They might be small businesses, right? But they employ 1 or 2 people, right? And I think that's super important, right? In any context, whether you're talking about the subcontinent, the Middle East, Africa, the Americas, right? I think that's going to be key. And then you look at back and you think to yourself, what's the legacy you want to leave here, right? It's great that you could become CEO of a company, but why do you want to become CEO, right? And if you talk to most CEOs, right, which I'm sure you've done, right, you realize they're very humble, right? And they're juggling multiple balls. They've got a set of regulators to appease, shareholders, but really top of mind for them, right, is customers, right? Now, it's sometimes challenging communicating that and solving it, right? But that's their role, right? And they know it more than anybody. And sometimes it can be quite frustrating, right? Because you don't get out to the customers as much as you should to solve their problems and their needs, right? So hopefully that sheds a little bit of light about South Africa in the 1980s, 1990s, shares a little bit about why I am who I am today, right? And why I look for these opportunities for change, right? I firmly believe we are born with a gift. Sometimes it takes a long time to find that gift, right? But you do manage to make, when you find it, right, make a huge positive impact out of it.
I think the way you articulated the reason of, getting into banking and connected with your personal experience, I think that is extremely strong. That has that power. Why? Because it comes from deep within. It's not something for which you require external motivation, right? It comes from within you. And when you articulate the reason for getting into financial services or getting into consulting to make a impact on the world, and that definition of the world could be your world, right? I mean, you can define your how do you define your worldview? That vision is something behind which a lot of people can back you up, right? So I can now also correlate your leadership style and why so many people are blindly happy to follow you and work with you, because you are following a vision. People are not doing just a job. You're not doing just a job, right? You're following a vision. You have a end game, or at least you're trying to solve a problem behind which everyone is running, right? And I think in day-to-day life, a lot of times this gets lost. And this requires a reminder. I think this is a very good reminder, not just for me, but also for anyone who will listen to this podcast, that why exactly are we doing what we are doing, right? Day-to-day life, people just get busy and forget why they are doing it. But when they will hear that exactly when we are working in financial services, it is to reduce inequality. It is for people like your mom, right, who face difficulties because of these financial inequalities, who probably were not able to, again, achieve what their dreams were because of the restrictions, external restrictions. And if you can do your bit to help even one more person or 100 more person, or if in your position, maybe hundreds of thousands of people to reduce that gap, that will be a beautiful story to tell. So I'm really glad that you shared that with us.
Thank you. And it means a lot to me, right? And, everybody also has their own personal story, right? And sometimes you also have to dig a little bit. One of my favorite interview questions is, tell me about yourself, right? And they'll tell me a little bit about their CV, right? About, I achieved this, I did fantastic. Then I probe and I ask, like, why are you here? And then they'll say, because I'm here for this job, right? And like, no. Why are you actually here, right, on this planet, right? And that's a great conversation starter, right? Because it crystallizes a person's reason for being, right? The reason for existing, right? And as you mentioned, right, the world is full of horror stories, right? It's full of challenges, right? But it's also full of hope and beauty, right? And hope is something you can't kill, right? We can all hope and dream for a better future. I mean, at the end of the day, right, you want to create a better future for your children, and you want to do something that your parents will be proud of.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
You tick those boxes, you've done well in life, right? It's, the byproduct of that is success, and that can come to your point, right? It could be the social stature in your community. It could be, hey, I wanted a Ferrari because I watched Magnum PI as a kid in the 80s, right? So it depends, right? And that's why I think it's important for people to tap into that, right? And everybody has it. And I show you, people find it and they tap into it more often and a lot more bring that authenticity out, especially in a working context. Good things happen, right, by individuals. Great things happen. Great things happen when you bring individuals together to work collectively as a team.
Absolutely. Rightly said. Uh, we spoke about earlier about your love for books, and you are very well read. Uh, you have you love recommending books to everyone. Uh, so let's go back. Like, when did this love for books start? Uh, I am glad that your kids, you know, will get this opportunity to, read a lot of books or build this habit of reading books, because I started reading books when I was probably 23, 24, and I mean, on a regular basis, right? And I just, that's one regret, that hopefully, someone when I was 7, 8 years old would have told me that, you should read books, because that opens up so many doors that just changes your complete worldview, right? So when did your love for books start? How has that helped you develop? And if you can give us some of your recommendations.
Well, I think we had a bit of an unfair advantage, right, in the 80s, right? Because I told you the economic situation, the political situation, right? There was no Netflix, right? I mean, there was one television channel, right, that used to come on between, I think, 6 o'clock in the morning till about 8 o'clock at night. So you were very limited in the amount of screen time, as they say, you would have, right? And also, I mean, the cartoons were like 5 minutes before you left for school, right? So you either watched it, right, and you couldn't afford to go to the bathroom, right, or you missed it. No video on demand, no catch up, nothing. And then obviously that's the sports channel, news stat channel, all rolled into one. So I think you had to be a lot more creative, right, in how you used your time, both using your imagination, right, but also pursuing other things. So, growing up for me, reading books was one of them, right? It provided a great avenue for me, right? My mom was an English teacher, right? So that was uh, my probably another factor in my favor. And libraries were freely available, right? That was the one thing that you could, and you get any book, right? No matter what level of censorship, if you looked for it, you'd find the book, right? But it's also my superpower, right? I gain knowledge from my interactions with other people, but also because I read, right? And funny enough, right? By reading, you get not just ideas, it challenges long-held beliefs, but you get to formulate your own opinions and thoughts, right? Based on facts that you have gone into. We live in a world where, you pick up your phone, right? And it's like the answer is there. But is that really the answer? Have you really challenged yourself critically thinking, right, about things? And I think those are the skills that are going to be required in the future, right? The critical skills capability. People do learn in other ways, right? I love the tactile feel of a book, right? It's weird. I work in digital, right? I'm the digital guy, right? Everything I do is digital, right? But lo and behold, I love reading books, right? I just enjoy it, right? And it's quite nice, right? And believe it or not, right, there'll always be some line to wait in, whether you're at an airport or whether you're at a government office or somewhere, right? There's some sort of line. Go about your book and read. It's like the funnest thing and best thing that you could do for 5-10 minutes. People are often ask me like, you read widely? And yeah, I think I do, right? This how do you get through so many books? You've got a hectic job, you've got this family, and you've got your other wannabe pursuits, sidebar, wannabe triathlete, right? Wannabe, right? Meaning that there's a nice image I have of myself that I'm struggling to obtain. But I tell people, read 10 pages every night. In 1 month, you would finish one book easily. It's a great way to
Absolutely.
de-stress.
For me, the best time to read books is in flights.
Yeah.
There's no distraction. The phone is off. There's no distraction. I don't opt for the Wi-Fi at all. And that's the best time to read books. Like if it's a long flight, you can for hours just sit and read. Even during commute, that's the best time. And as you rightly said, like if you have to build a habit, just read for 5 minutes every day. That's it. That's it. Like that will put you in the top 1% in the world in terms of reading books.
And it's amazing, right? As you grow your career, right? And this is something that is going to be helpful for people. Your ability to synthesize information, right, becomes super important. So if you're a good reader, right, and you're also well read, so those two dynamics can help you quite a lot. You can quickly analyze a deck, right, or a presentation or something, right? You can easily pick up the linkages or the gaps that exist. So what would typically take somebody maybe an hour to do, you can do it in 15, 20 minutes maximum, right? And it will come naturally to you.
Even the ability to
and the other part, and the other part I think that's important, right? People learn differently. So I love books, right? My kids love books, but they consume it differently, right? They're into audiobooks, right? They're into digital screen books, right? Which is great, right? That works for them, right? Different generation. Can't judge. Just got to make it easier for them to know the balance. But the point here is that be a lifelong learner. Keep learning, right? It's one thing that will keep you young. It'll keep you motivated. It'll keep your energy levels incredibly high. You will accomplish much more, right, by being a lifelong learner, right? By stretching and growing. It's uncomfortable, right? It's quite difficult, right? I mean, a couple of years ago, I went back to university, and I was in a class, and I would say I think I was at the more top end of the class, right? It was a business school, right? But it was fascinating, right? We had kids that were straight out of university, 1 or 2 years of experience, right? There was a guy that was about to retire. So I wouldn't say I was at the other half of the class, but wow, right? It was really, really good to have that perspective of everybody's always on their learning journey, right? Learning different things and growing, right? They're not necessarily doing it. Some people are doing it because they want to get to the next career ladder. They want to create an opportunity for themselves. You open up a friendship network, you open up a work network, you open up a social network. There's a lot of things that you can do. And I mean, even yourself, you'll remember some of your guys from university, right? You still keep in contact with them. Any course you do, you'll at least remember 1 or 2 guys, right? Or ladies, right? That you still keep in contact with. That alone is the price of any course, any admission.
Amazing, amazing. No, absolutely. I couldn't agree more with you. I'll hold you on to the recommendation bit, but if you can recommend your top three books.
Yeah, listen. Everybody asks me who. It's like soccer teams. Who's the best soccer team, right? Who's your best? You can only have your personal favorite, right? No team for me will be better than Liverpool, right?
Are you kidding? You're a Liverpool fan?
Huge supporter,
amazing, right? Amazing. Same here.
Although my wife's family is Man United, right? So that obviously creates some conflict. But it's nice to tease people about. But in terms of, so I got some favorite books, right, in different categories, right? Mm-hmm. So the one that actually blew my mind recently was it's a series of books, a trilogy. If you're into sci-fi, read The Three-Body Problem, right? It is by a Chinese sci-fi writer, right? Non-fiction writer. Amazing book, amazing, right? The premise is, it's like, I don't want to give it away, right? But it's an amazing premise about humanity, right? And the choices we make, irrespective of whichever era you live in, right? It's a series of 3 books. It's like an opus. It's like 400, 500, 400 pages. Well worth it. Take your time reading through it. It's an amazing book, right? So I think that's a great book from a sci-fi perspective. From a leadership book perspective, I definitely think one of Simon Sinek's books, right? Huge fan of him, right? Not just the way the topics, but the way he communicates, right? He touches a lot of people, right? And really, helps them think things through, right? So obviously everybody knows his famous talk, Start With Why. But I think his better one, to be quite honest, is Leaders Eat Last.
Absolutely.
Really, really good book, right? And I was privileged to meet him and a few times, right? And also to attend a few of his talks, right? So definitely on the leadership angle, definitely go there. Economics, probably The Changing World Order by Ray Dalio. Very, very good. Very, very good. And then Sapiens, right, is also a good one around humanity, right? And then you get there's some great brand books out there, right? If you're into branding, anything from Richard Branson is always good. It's a quick read, right? But what I like about his books is that he was never an extrovert, right? Most people interpret him as an extrovert. He's highly introverted, right? So he challenges the underlying belief that, quiet people, can't be successful. Quiet people can't be great marketeers, and you have to be loud. But it shows you how you can learn and you can adapt your personal skill and style and create a global brand, right? That everybody recognizes and can be about. And then from a financial services banking perspective, right? Wow, there's a lot of good books out there, like a lot of good books, right? I would suggest, one of probably Chris Skinner's books, right, are pretty good, right? About the future of banking, right? The future of money. Also, great book, quick read, right? But great examples of unheard banks, right? Or unheard financial institution or unheard fintechs would probably be about build a brand, not a bank, right? So Google that one up. I think so. Those would be my set. From comics books, anything from Asterix and Obelix, right? Really love Asterix and Obelix and Tintin, right? Although later on in life you realize there's some things in Tintin that are probably not as you realize, wow, okay, there's some liminal racism happening here, right? And you do, but Tintin and Asterix was definitely, from a comics perspective, great.
Nice. Thank you so much for this. I really appreciated the way you have gone into the details and categorized them. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much for that. Moving on to your professional, I mean, I'm really glad that we had those two topics covered in length. But let's get to your professional bit as well, right? Like you had a long stint as a consultant. Then you decided to move into banking. Was that, again, as we spoke earlier, natural move because you wanted to have a bigger impact on the world? Was that the core reason behind that move? And that could be a short answer, but how has the transition worked for you? What are the challenges that you faced while transitioning from a consulting to a banking role?
So, coming out of university, right, I really had this burning ambition to make a positive impact on society. So typically you have a range of big companies that come to universities, right, to find the talent. You get companies like the big tobacco firms, right? If that's your thing, right? But clearly that would have created a bit of issue with where I want to go and what I want to do. There was consulting companies, right, who give you a great wide breadth and development, right, across the set of institutions you can get to work with. There were the big banks, obviously, FMCG, like the Unilever, Procter and Gamble, also excellent from a marketing perspective, right? Brilliant in terms of packaging and how to understand consumer trends. So you actually, as a youngster, you're faced with a lot of options, right? Which can be hugely overwhelming, right? And I'm going to be honest about this, right? But I went with the brand that was very cool and what everybody wanted to get into, right? I think that helped. But I wanted to get into something that was generalist enough for me to learn across a couple dimensions. Because even though I was passionate about financial services and the impact, it doesn't mean like working in a bank or a credit union is very different to how you would expect it to be or what you imagine. So my advice to anybody is like, number one, try a lot of different things, right? And you learn very quickly about the things that you like. Maybe you don't want to be a generalist. Maybe you want to be a specialist. Maybe you want to play at that intersection of the two, right? between operations, technology, business, right, digital, right? That's your sweet spot. Also, you might want to do something where you just want to learn the industry, or you want to learn the specialization with the industry, right? Is it supply chain? Is it procurement, right? So you pick something that gives you enough options. At the same time, there are girls and boys out there who know that they've always wanted to do this, right? I have friends who always wanted to be engineers, right? Nothing would dissuade them from that, right? So it's not a one-size-fits-all answer, right? So it depends, but I think my guidance to people is try a lot of different things, especially in your 20s, because your opportunity cost for learning is so much greater, right, than the opportunity cost of failing, right?
Absolutely.
And if you challenge yourself enough in your 20s, right, you will have a wonderful 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, right? Because you would learn the adaptability and the flexibility, right, to be able to change gears. More importantly, to understand different people's perspectives, the service provider, the customer, the client, the relationship between that and any institution. You'd understand the operations, junior management, middle management, senior management, right? Board, right? And the trade-offs and the decisions that go on between them, right? Because a company, any business is a collection of people, right? So you're dealing with people's fears, hopes, ambitions, right? As well as the things that they're being held to account for. So if you insert yourself into that, you think about like, how can I help make this situation better? You can either be a painkiller or vitamin, right? The idea is to be a painkiller up front, right? Kills people's pain, right? And then you can give them vitamins later. Giving them vitamins while they're in pain is not going to do much, right? You gotta like make sure you address the root cause. So I spent about a decade, right? So that was my choice, right? Of going. I think it also helped. I should add that I have an older brother, right, who also joined the company, right? So maybe the people say sibling competitiveness, right? I think it was random fate, right? The recruiter knew my brother. He was like, yeah, we know this family. We want this guy here, right? I was like, maybe not, right? But the good company, good brand, doing great things with lots of different companies. I was very fortunate, right? Because I ended up in financial services, or I started in financial services. I worked across the entire value stream of financial services. I got exposed to asset management, investment management, big banks, small banks, insurance companies, credit unions, right? In the space of 10 years, amazing. I've like lived multiple lifetimes, right? Met great people, great leaders, right? And I think my second piece of advice is in any career, in anything in life, have a board of advisors, right? Some of them might be your sponsors, some of them might be your mentors, some of them might just be your coach, some of them might just be somebody that you just want to like unburden on, right? But have that board of directors for your life that you can reach out to. Those people would really, really help you grow and make sure, also keep your feet grounded, right? That you are on the right track in terms of going and having that impact that you set yourself out to have. And then the big transition for me came after about a decade, right? I had spent a lot of time in consulting. Great. The one challenge with consulting is that you don't actually see things right through to the end. You are there for maybe 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 2 years, right? So you get in, you diagnose, you address the pain, but you don't do the vitamins part of it. So for me, it was like, ooh, after a decade, let me go and try to do something different, right? So, and this is part of also my psyche and the change that I like to do. So getting into a corporate environment, which is very different to a consulting environment. Consulting environment is very much up or out in terms of high performance delivered. Corporate culture is much about how do you develop and grow people for like almost cradle to grave within an organization. And also it's about, you're not necessarily working with the A team that you get at in some of the consulting firms. Consulting firms, they look for a certain type, A-type personalities, high performers, have a career of history of doing things, right? But I think the important thing is when you enter into an institution like a bank or a big corporate, right, you're going to be mixing with all levels, right? A team players, B team players, C team players, D team players. And you need all of them, right? Not everybody wants to grow and become CEO or chairman of the board, right? Some people have other commitments. They have other priorities that they want to do in their lives. Maybe it's caring after their parents, or they enjoy their job, right? They enjoy like having the impact that they have in their team, right? Rather than trying to manage a team of teams, right? So you also got to be very careful of not trying to cloud people or box people too much, right? Or think everybody can do everything. Just understand that everybody has their own background and own things that they want to achieve. But if they sign up to the mission and the goal, that's the best thing, right? That's where you need to push it. So the transition was based on getting that experience working across that value chain, right, of the different mix of people, and also getting the scars on your back that you need, right, after 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, living with the strategic decisions that you made the previous time, because to deliver those things are important. I was very fortunate, right, in both my time in consulting and in banking, right, to work across Africa, right, doing a host of different type of things, right? So I did stuff from system implementations to operational plans to strategies to cross-border migrations to setting up global centers to working in Australia and New Zealand, right? I was very super fortunate to lead the transformation at my last company, right? Also to lead a whole rebrand across the continent of Africa, right? We're talking about 10 million customers, 12 countries, 40,000 employees, right? So you're not changing one thing, right? You're changing everything, right? So how do you bring people on this journey, right? How do you make them believe in this, right? Especially in a brand that hasn't been in the country before, or replacing a brand that's been there for 100 odd years, and a brand from another geography. These are all the challenges that you face, right? How do you do it within time, on budget, right? Keeping everybody motivated, right? And keeping everybody on side.
So this was going to be my, this has been playing on my mind, that when you were doing this and you were managing teams of teams, right? Thinking about a lot of change, and change management is never easy, mostly from a people perspective, right? Because a huge team has to change direction, and it takes time. It takes time for everyone to align, right? And we spoke about, leaders eat last. It's an next book. What's been your leadership principles or way of leading teams? If you can maybe touch upon some of those principles, I think that will also give us an insight in terms of when you're bringing this amount of change across so many years, across so many organizations, right? What are the principles which have remained constant and they have worked across, right? If you can, maybe that will be really helpful.
Number one, I would go back. Try to be a painkiller and a vitamin infuser, right? Do not be there are lots of problems in the world. We can admire those problems, or we can actually take charge and try to change some of the things that contribute to the problems, or try to resolve it, right? Anybody can do it in your daily life, right? And it's small things. It doesn't necessarily need to be big things, right? So I think that's the first thing, is having the right mindset, right? Also, you're not doing a job, you are performing a role. And what I mean by performing a role, you are occupying, whether you're an individual contributor, right? Whether you're a supervisor, team leader, manager, senior manager, you are occupying a role. That role exists for you to look after the team beneath you, to push them, to prod them sometimes, right, in the right direction, right, so that they grow, develop, and get challenged, right, so that they too become agents of change in whatever careers that they have in the future, right? So I think that's the second one. It's not about you. It's never about you, right? It's about your team and the people around you. And you'll only occupy that role for a certain amount of time. Yes, even founders, right, and who are going to be CEO and chairman of the company, eventually they retire. Yep. The role, the trappings of power and benefits associated is temporary, right? So you got to make sure you leave it in a better place for the next person that comes. Yeah. Right. I think the third one is the playbook is very clear, right, on this. Have a core purpose, communicate often, be authentic as possible, trust people, right? Sometimes you will be let down. But if you assemble the right people around you, you'll be hugely successful, right? Have what I call a work mother and a work father at work. People who make sure that you eat, right? Because it gets hectic sometimes. If you're really engrossed in your work, time flies, right? And you're like, wow, I haven't eaten the whole day, right? Which is not good for your health, right? And the work dad is probably like your board of directors, right? Like someone tell you, like, go on leave, right? Just take 2 weeks off now, right? You are driving very hard. You're driving the team very hard as well, right? And again, you can only do that for it's sustainable, but it's not unsustainable, right? So you could just understand that there are times where you also have to let off, right, and just go away for a little bit, right? Get out. And I think the fifth principle, right, will be about you're occupying this role and you're doing these things, right? But you also got to make sure you and your team pick up their heads every now and again, look around and say, how can I help you? Right? Not do you need help? How can I help? And understand what's happening around you, right? I think that's super powerful. I think if you follow those, I think you'll be more than successful, right? There are other avenues, right? You can study your way to success, possible. You can climb the corporate ladder on your way to success, but an executive committee only has 10, 12 people maximum, right? So you get a lot more joy and fulfillment, right, if you're making a positive impact on the people around you, and you'll be successful as a byproduct of it, right?
Thank you, Nahim, for sharing those. It's been an interesting chat, Nahim, and I'll end this chat with one personal question for you. What is the kindest thing that someone has ever done for you?
Wow, that's a great question. Great question, right? Actually happened a few years ago, right? Every now and again, right, somebody will surprise you in the office, right? The kindest thing that somebody has ever done was to leave me I've had this a few times, right? But a little thank you note, right, goes a long way, right? The acknowledgement, right? Because you're carrying a lot of change agents in a lot of institutions, right? Carry a lot on their shoulders, right? But every now and again, right, you'll find a little trinket on your desk, right? Pair of socks, like, I don't know why it's socks. Socks seems maybe because they don't know what to get. It's like Father's Day, right? What do you get the dad of the team, right? Socks, like get him happy socks to be edgy. No, but like little thank you notes, right, goes a long way, right? I always appreciate those, right? Because sometimes you'll be coming out of a board meeting, an ExCom meeting, or even a team meeting, right? And it's a heavy day, and then you find this like little note on your desk. So it's something that's always stuck with me. So try to pay it forward, right? And one thing I can recommend to everybody who's working in any organization, in your immediate team, the day you start, understand when everybody's birthdays are. On the day it's their birthday, call them, give them the day off.
That's a good way. That's a good one.
So, so pay it forward, right? Try to do your best, right? But like I said, the thank you notes, always fantastic, right? Because you keep them actually, right? You keep them in your drawer, right? They become your personal highlights reel, not the, oh, you know what, I delivered this great presentation or I built this great product, right? It's when you see these things like, this is so cool, man. And you remember the person from 5 years ago, might give them a call, might send them a WhatsApp. I actually did it last night to one of my first hiring manager about 20 years ago, right? He's like, where are you in the world? I was like, I was thinking about you because I told your story about how you never forget your start group in any organization.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a beautiful story. That's a beautiful story, Nahim. I think this has been an absolute pleasure and an interesting conversation to have with you. Thank you so much for coming onto the podcast. I absolutely loved it, and I'm sure that people who would listen to this will also love it. Thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to meet you whenever I'm in your town.
Perfect. You can find me on Twitter. You can find me on LinkedIn, right? If anybody wants to connect at Nahim.Bassa, please reach out. Happy to chat, share my experiences. Also to connect to anybody with the right people.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you, Nahim. Take care.